My name is Alyssa Johnson. I'm 23 years old, and I've been working at my father's company. I'm also married to Nathan, who's 29, and we've been together for 2 years. We have a 1-year-old son, Leo. Nathan often suggests I should leave my job at my father's company, mainly because he doesn't like my parents. He seems to be bothered by my father's lack of formal education and the small, somewhat run-down company he runs, which manufactures screws and small components. Nathan doesn't want to be associated with it. In contrast, I admire my father for his hard work, courage in the face of challenges, and genuine care for his employees. I have no plans to leave my father's company. Nathan also seems to dislike that I respect my father more than him. One morning, while having breakfast with Nathan and our son, Leo, he brought up the topic again. Alyssa, you should consider a job at a bigger company. You graduated from a prestigious university and you're beautiful. I'd love to boast about you at work, but I can't because of where you work now. Besides, I earn enough for us. Why don't you consider staying home instead? These conversations always end the same way, with me telling Nathan I won't quit my father's company. Typically, Nathan responds with remarks like, "You're the only one in the world who doesn't listen to me," or, "If you keep this up, it will be harder for us to stay together." Then he usually leaves the room. Later, he often does something petty to upset me and then gloats, asking if I'll listen to him now. Though divorce has crossed my mind, I can't bring myself to go through with it. Both our families get along well and love Leo dearly. My father and father-in-law are good friends and spend time golfing and fishing together. My mother and mother-in-law enjoy art exhibitions together. Both sets of parents have provided Leo with a loving environment that I wouldn't want to disrupt. My feelings for Nathan have faded, and I no longer enjoy sharing a bed with him. Since Leo was born, I've been sleeping in Leo's room with the door locked. Nathan used to barge in and argue about my job, scaring Leo with his loud voice. Now he stays away at night, but I keep the door locked just in case. This morning, as usual, Nathan harassed me for not quitting my father's company. Instead of coming home for dinner, he went out drinking with colleagues and sent me a photo of himself smiling with a female coworker. This doesn't bother me or make me feel insecure. He messaged me saying, "This is how I blow off steam because you won't listen to me. Quit your father's company now." I wanted to ignore his message, but for the sake of our families and Leo, I responded, "I just wanted you to come home and have dinner with us." His reply was dismissive. "Must have been tough, huh? I'm coming home now." I regret marrying Nathan. Though he's intelligent, his behavior is immature and frustrating. Then one day, Nathan happily announced, "I might be getting promoted soon," Nathan said with excitement. "Wow, that's great." I replied, "Did that recent deal go through?" "Not finalized yet, but it's as good as done. The boss will be thrilled, maybe even cry with joy. The director who used to be so high and mighty will have to bow down to me now, haha." That day, Nathan surprisingly didn't urge me to quit my job at my father's company. Instead, he headed off to his own workplace while I left home with Leo to go to my office. As usual, I dropped Leo off at my parents' house nearby before going to work. Upon arriving at work, my coworker Jake hurried over to me. "Good morning, Alyssa. The boss seems unusually upset today. Did something happen? Everyone's worried about him." Hearing this, I immediately went to the room labeled Invention Room, where my father was. Inside, I found a young man in his 20s sitting on the sofa, his face streaked with tears. My father, looking more furious than I had ever seen him, was sitting across from the young man. "Sorry, Alyssa, I can't spare the time to chat right now," my father said curtly. "Everyone's worried about you." "What's going on?" I asked, concerned. Apologizing for his abruptness, my father invited me to join the conversation. As I took a seat next to my father and looked at the young man's tear-streaked face, he stood up and introduced himself. "Nice to meet you. I'm Scott." "I'm sorry for causing any trouble," Scott said apologetically. I asked him, "What happened, Scott?" Scott began explaining his situation. He works at an electrical machinery manufacturer and had recently been promoted to assistant leader for a new machinery project. However, the designated leader didn't attend meetings or go to the field, essentially serving as a figurehead. The team members preferred it this way as it made their work easier. Scott found himself fulfilling the leader's responsibilities. Scott mentioned that some components from my father's company were chosen for his project. He visited my father's company without an appointment and, in a disrespectful manner, demanded to speak to the CEO. His appearance, marked by unkempt hair and multiple rings, didn't sit well with my father's secretaries, Jackson and Randy. They asked Scott to adjust his attitude and appearance before returning. Unaware of what was wrong with his demeanor, Scott went back to his company and spoke to his boss, who reacted angrily. "Don't let them walk all over you. Assert yourself and tell them we're using their parts," his boss said. Eager to meet his colleagues' demands and use my father's company's components, Scott returned to my father's company. This time, he approached Jackson and Randy more respectfully, asking, "Please tell me how I can improve my approach." My father happened to overhear the conversation and invited Scott into the meeting room for a discussion. "We don't judge people by their appearances," my father began. "I believe they were trying to teach you workplace etiquette," my father explained. Jackson and Randy nodded in agreement and began instructing Scott on professional conduct. "When you visit other companies, they often judge your entire organization based on your presentation. Which type of company do you think would be better received? One where people are well-dressed and courteous, or one that isn't?" they asked. Scott answered, "The former," and apologized, promising to start anew. After making an appointment, Scott returned with a more polished appearance, back straight, hair neatly styled, and no accessories. As we spoke with him, we saw his sincerity and dedication to his work, not just in terms of components, but also his willingness to collaborate and share ideas. This led to successful cooperation between young members of Scott's company and my father's. They frequently sought advice from us, and progress was made on a new prototype over 6 months. But just as the project neared completion, the leader of Scott's team took all the prepared presentation materials and promoted a favored young female employee, removing the assistant leader from his position. The team and collaborators strongly opposed this, but were silenced with threats of spreading rumors and making their work life difficult. Upon hearing this, my father was enraged. Jackson, who had been listening, commented, "Those rumors are just lies, right? You shouldn't be scared of them." Scott explained that the assistant leader's removal was due to reporting a violation of working hours to the HR department. Despite facing severe warnings, he stood his ground. Scott returned to my father's company because he was frustrated with the changes and wanted to discuss everything. "You should leave that company and come work for us, right, boss?" Jackson suggested. My father, impersonating a character from an iconic Western movie, made everyone but Scott burst into laughter. Scott responded, "Despite the serious work you do, you all seem to enjoy yourselves. I've always admired that, and I want to work with you all," he said with tears in his eyes as he bowed to my father. As I listened to Scott's story, something continued to bother me, prompting me to ask him a question. I asked, "What's the name of your company?" And when Scott responded, it turned out to be the same machinery manufacturing company where my husband worked. Hesitantly, I asked further, "Can I ask the name of your team leader?" As I had feared, Scott answered, "His name is Nathan Johnson." My father and I exchanged a shocked glance and held our heads in disbelief. After a moment of silence, Randy commented, "Ah, I knew I'd heard that name before. It's Alyssa's husband." I explained to Scott, "I'm sorry, but Nathan is my husband." Scott responded, "He's the one who gave me the opportunity to work at this company, so I'm actually grateful to him for that." Jackson seemed to have a concern on his mind and asked cautiously, "Given that Alyssa's here, does the favored female employee have any connection to your husband?" Scott looked at me nervously, unsure of how to proceed. I reassured him, "Don't worry about it. I'm in a sham marriage with my husband. I don't have feelings for him anymore." This revelation took my father by surprise. After apologizing to my father for causing him distress, I opened up about all the difficulties I've been experiencing every day, explaining why I hadn't spoken up sooner. He listened and finally understood the situation. "No wonder my grandson Leo hasn't been very affectionate with me then," he said. He went on to say, "I've lived a life I'm proud of, so I don't care what anyone says about me. But it must be tough for Alyssa to keep hearing negative things about her parents. Don't worry though. I'll maintain my relationship with their parents since they're family and friends. If you ever want to come home, you're always welcome." His words lifted a weight off my shoulders. Jackson then asked Scott, "And what about the relationship between your husband and the favored female employee?" Scott replied, "There are no concrete facts, just rumors circulating. But several employees have witnessed the two of them coming out of meeting rooms or document rooms together. A few have even seen them going out for lunch." At this point, Randy made a phone call. "Hey, I have a situation I'd like you to investigate. Can you come to the office right now?" He asked the person on the other end of the line. Once he hung up, he said, "I'm going to have a friend from a private investigation agency look into this." Jackson then picked up the phone and started dialing, saying, "Hello. I need a lawyer who specializes in divorce cases involving infidelity. Can you come to the office right now?" "Thanks," Jackson said into the phone. As Jackson and Randy made progress with their calls, my dad chuckled and said, "Your ability to take swift action is one of your greatest strengths." Scott offered to keep a close watch on Nathan and the favored female employee for the time being. Everyone then returned to their respective work areas, and my father reassured the concerned employees by saying, "I'm sorry for causing you all worry, but it looks like we can find humor in a situation now. Thank you as always." The employees' smiles returned, and the usual lively atmosphere was restored in the workplace. My father approached me and asked, "May I discuss the recent events with your in-laws?" I responded, "I just want you to encourage them to continue visiting and showering Leo with affection as they always have." By early afternoon, the private detective and the lawyer arrived to discuss our future plans in the planning room. The meeting's contents were shared with everyone present, and it was decided that Jackson, who had returned to the company, would relay the meeting's details to me after work. When I went to pick up Leo from my parents' house, I explained the situation from my perspective, apologizing for not revealing my husband's true nature sooner. I felt guilty for trampling on my parents' beliefs that my marriage was happy. My mother, instead of being upset, seemed relieved. "Now we need to prepare a room for my daughter and grandson," she said, smiling. She remembered the disdainful look my husband had given my father's company when he first saw it and had suspected he wasn't a good man. "I wish you had told me sooner." The next day, Jackson received a call from Scott on his smartphone. Scott had submitted his resignation, explaining that he planned to spend his remaining time at the company on miscellaneous tasks and transitioning his responsibilities without taking any paid time off. The company accepted his resignation, but members of the project team visited the HR department to declare, "We've all violated the company's work rules like Mr. Scott, so please discipline us as well." With resignation letters in hand, the HR department was thrown into chaos. By the end of the regular workday, my husband had already left the office. A meeting was held in the large conference room, attended by the company president, department heads, and the remaining project team members, including Scott. It was revealed that my husband, the team leader, had not attended any meetings or been present at work, nor had he contributed to the project. Instead, he took credit for the work the team had completed, removed Scott from his role as assistant leader, and replaced him with a favored female employee. The company president expressed deep regret at the situation if the allegations were true. Scott suggested that no immediate action be taken until all evidence was gathered. Since the sister-in-law of one of the company's clients was conducting an investigation using a private detective, it was proposed that nothing be said to my husband without concrete evidence. The company agreed to wait for the evidence and then question my husband before deciding on disciplinary action. They asked the team members to hold off on submitting their resignations. Unaware of these serious developments, my husband, who usually returned home on time, came home around 9 p.m. after Leo had gone to bed. He began ranting about how ineffective everyone else was, boasting that he had been working overtime to ensure the project's success. He believed everyone was jealous because he was on the path to becoming a department head after the project's success. Knowing the truth, I couldn't help but chuckle at his delusions. In his good mood, I offered him a few compliments, which I didn't really mean. He seemed to relish imagining himself as the future department head, basking in the admiration and envy of others. My husband kept grinning, fueled by his fantasies. Meanwhile, at work, Scott's plan was set in motion. The team members began to shower my husband with continuous praise. "Mr. Department Head," they teased, "not quite yet, but the CEO seems very optimistic about the project." They flattered him with comments like, "How can we become as competent as you, Mr. Johnson?" My husband was overjoyed and caught up in his newfound popularity, becoming increasingly less guarded. Then, as planned, we managed to capture videos of his affair with a female employee using hidden cameras in the document and conference rooms. In just 5 days, the detective agency and Scott amassed substantial evidence of his infidelity. All that remained was to prove my husband hadn't created the project documents himself. This task was straightforward. Scott had saved the documents on a USB drive. which would clearly expose the truth if the company questioned him and my husband about their contents. Scott and other team members submitted all the evidence to the company. Unaware of any of this, my husband returned home in high spirits. He launched into his fantasies, saying, "I'm definitely going to be named department head." The CEO had a long conversation with the current head, and then the head looked at me. He must have told him, "I'd rather have Mr. Johnson's head in charge than any incompetent person." He continued his daydreams. "This will widen the gap between your father's company and mine even more. You should quit your job and become a full-time housewife. You'll be the wife of a department head," he said. I responded loudly, feigning anger. "Your parents would be furious if they knew you were mocking mine. You'd have their close friends. I take pride in my work and enjoy it. I'm not quitting." My husband snapped back, "Never invite your parents to our family events again. If you don't like it, get out. I'll have women lining up for me once I become department head." When I asked if he was certain, he retorted, "What do you mean? Don't contact me again." So I replied, "All right, I'll leave," and had him sign the divorce papers I prepared. The next morning, I watched him leave for work in silence. Then I called my father to help me move. As my father, his coworkers, and I loaded our belongings onto a truck, my in-laws arrived offering their assistance. "We came to help," they said, and we exchanged apologies. "Thank you for allowing us to be Leo's grandparents. Our fool of a son is disowned. We're counting on you now," Alyssa, they said, bowing their heads. I held their hands and bowed in return, expressing my gratitude. My father said, "Let's hurry and move everything so we can relax at home," to which my father-in-law agreed. "Let's do that," as they both continued to help with the move. Once we finished the move, in front of my parents and in-laws, I showed them the signed divorce papers and explained that I was parting ways with my husband. My in-laws repeatedly apologized, but my father reassured them, saying, "Let's keep getting along, Ken," and gave my father-in-law a friendly pat on the knee. My mother chimed in, "Mary, let's continue our embroidery sessions together. There's an art exhibition next week. Let's go." She gave my mother-in-law an affectionate pat on the knee. "Ken, Mary, why don't you stay at our house tonight for some drinks?" My father offered, bringing out the beverages. My father-in-law accepted. "Thanks, we'll take you up on that offer tonight." The cordial interaction brought my parents and in-laws even closer, without me feeling like I was intruding. That night, I decided to go to Leo's room and rest. The next day, my husband was summoned to a conference room by the company's executives, including the CEO and department head. Also present were Scott, the team members, and the female employee he had an affair with. The CEO conducted the hearing himself, questioning my husband about whether he had tried to claim the project as his own without contributing to it and stealing the completed documents. Since Scott and the team members were there, my husband couldn't find an excuse and remained silent. The CEO, growing impatient, demanded loudly, "Well, what do you have to say?" Under pressure, my husband quickly admitted to his actions. Next, the CEO questioned him about why he had demoted Scott from the sub-leader position and replaced him with the female employee. My husband tried to justify it by saying she was more capable than Scott. The department head countered, "You're saying the woman who only serves tea and makes copies is more capable than Mr. Scott." My husband bit his lip, lowering his head in silence. The CEO then projected still images from video footage taken in the conference room and document room, leaving both my husband and the female employee, Alice, looking pale. The CEO asked Alice, "Miss Ford, what is the meaning of this?" Alice responded without hesitation, explaining that Mr. Johnson had promised her an easier time at work if they were together, but she hadn't been serious about the relationship since she already had a boyfriend. "I just considered it part of the job," she added. My husband, enraged by her response, exclaimed, "You had a boyfriend? You cheating woman. You've ruined my life." Alice snapped back, "You have a wife, Tim Nathan. Don't get mad at me." The argument between them escalated, prompting the CEO to interrupt. "Enough. The fact-finding is over. I'll inform you of the disciplinary action later. Until then, Mr. Johnson and Miss Ford, you are both suspended and must stay home." With that, the CEO left the conference room, and everyone else followed suit. My husband was eventually reassigned to a manual job in the basement, sorting documents in what was known as the company's useless department. Alice, who struggled at the office after her boyfriend found out about the affair, eventually resigned. A lawyer had drawn up an agreement for them to sign, with my husband required to pay me $3 million and Alice $2 million in compensation. Both had to take out loans from finance companies to make the payments. Additionally, my husband agreed to pay an extra $5,000 per month for Leo's child support. A few months later, my husband, now disowned by his parents, was working 2 jobs, one at a convenience store during the day and another as a security guard at night. He lived alone in a run-down apartment and looked much older than his years. As someone who saw him remarked, he appeared to be around 60 years old.